What happens when the woman you threw away for a life of glamour turns out to be the gatekeeper to a world you can only dream of? Tonight, we delve into the story of Ethan Hayes, a man who thought he had it all. A trophy, girlfriend on his arm, and a ticket to the inner circle. He was attending the most exclusive party of the year, ready to toast to his new life and the plain, boring wife he'd left behind. But he was about to learn a brutal lesson. Sometimes the quietest people hold the loudest power. In a world of shimmering facades and calculated ambition, a ghost from his past was about to arrive, not in rags, but in riches he couldn't possibly comprehend. Stay tuned, because this is a story of karma consequence and a reveal so shocking it shattered one man's entire reality. The air in Ethan Hayes' penthouse apartment was thick with the scent of Chanel No. 5 and ambition. Tiffany Dubois, a woman whose beauty was as curated as her Instagram feed, adjusted the strap of her glittering Hervé Leger dress in the reflection of a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Central Park. "Do you think this highlights my assets enough, babe?" she asked, striking a pose that was second nature to her. "Marcus Thorne will be there. I want his wife to feel insecure." Ethan smirked, straightening his Tom Ford tuxedo. At 34, he was the picture of Wall Street success: sharp suit, sharper haircut, and a Patek Philippe watch that cost more than his first car. Everything about you makes other women feel insecure. "Tiff, that's why I'm with you." She preened at the compliment, the perfect validation for her existence. Tiffany was his upgrade, his real life. His previous life, the 6-year marriage to Amelia, felt like a black and white film he'd been forced to watch. Amelia. Just thinking her name brought a sigh of boredom. Plain Amy. That's what he'd called her in his head. She was comfortable, predictable. Her idea of a wild Friday night was finding a first edition copy of some obscure novel at a dusty bookstore, or tending to the small herb garden on their modest balcony. She wore sensible shoes, and her hair was almost always pulled back in a simple ponytail. She never understood his drive, his need to climb the social and corporate ladder at Blackwood Capital. "Why do you have to network so much?" Ethan, she'd asked him once, her brow furrowed with genuine confusion as he prepared for yet another mandatory client dinner. "Don't you ever just want to stay home and read with me?" The memory made him clench his jaw. He'd seen it as a lack of ambition, a ball and chain on his ankle. He wanted a partner who would shine beside him, a woman who would be an asset, not just a quiet presence in the background. Tiffany, with her 2 million followers and an encyclopedic knowledge of who was who in the New York elite, was that asset. The divorce had been surprisingly easy. Amelia hadn't fought him. There was no screaming, no throwing plates, just a quiet, heartbreaking sadness in her eyes that had made him feel a flicker of guilt before his ambition snuffed it out. She didn't ask for much, just her personal belongings and half the value of their apartment, which he'd gladly paid to be free of her. She'd packed her worn-out paperbacks, her gardening tools, and her collection of vintage maps into cardboard boxes and disappeared from his life. He'd heard through a mutual acquaintance that she'd moved somewhere on the West Coast, maybe Oregon, to find herself. He'd snorted at the cliché. "Ready to go?" Tiffany's voice pulled him from the past. "The Uber is downstairs. A black SUV, obviously." "Let's do it," Ethan said, his voice brimming with confidence. "Tonight's the night. Marcus Thorne is on the verge of a massive logistics deal for Thorne Industries. If I can get in his ear, convince him Blackwood Capital is the firm to handle the financing, it'll mean a partnership for me by Christmas. And a new Birkin for me." Tiffany cooed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "As many as you want," he promised, kissing her glossy lips. As they descended in the elevator, Ethan felt a surge of triumph. This was his world now. The galas, the private jets, the beautiful woman on his arm. He had shed his boring domestic skin and emerged as the man he was always meant to be. He had traded up in every conceivable way, leaving the quiet, unremarkable Amelia Vance in his rearview mirror. He hadn't just divorced her. He had erased her. He was sure he would never have to think about her again. The annual Thorne Foundation Gala was not merely a party, it was a coronation. Held at Marcus Thorne's palatial estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, it was where deals were born and social hierarchies were cemented. Helicopters deposited guests on one lawn, while a fleet of Rolls-Royces and Bentleys lined the cobblestone driveway. Every titan of industry, every political heavyweight, and every ounce of old money on the East Coast was present. For Ethan, walking through the grand entrance with Tiffany was like ascending Mount Olympus. The air hummed with power. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, casting a golden glow on the mingling crowds. A string quartet played Vivaldi in a corner, their music a genteel backdrop to the low murmur of billion-dollar conversations. "Wow!" Tiffany whispered, her eyes wide, immediately pulling out her phone to capture a discreet story for her followers. "That's David Solomon from Goldman Sachs over there. And is that—" Senator Kensington Ethan's chest swelled with pride. "This is where we belong, Tiff." He navigated the room with practiced ease, a shark in a sea of bigger sharks. He exchanged pleasantries with a tech CEO. He knew from a previous deal, clapped a hedge fund manager on the back, and subtly ensured Tiffany was photographed, standing near the wife of a real estate mogul. Every move was calculated a step closer to his true target, Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a living legend, a self-made billionaire in his late 50s, with a formidable presence and eyes that seemed to see right through you. He was holding court near the massive marble fireplace, a circle of deferential listeners hanging on his every word. Getting a moment of his time tonight was Ethan's entire objective. "Okay, I'm going in," Ethan said to Tiffany, handing her a glass of champagne. "Mingle. Look stunning. You know the drill." "Don't worry," she purred. "I'll make sure everyone knows who I am." As Tiffany drifted off towards a group of socialites, Ethan took a deep breath and began to strategize his approach. He couldn't just walk up. That would be too aggressive. He needed an opening. He spotted Thorne's chief financial officer, a man he'd met briefly at a conference, and made a beeline for him. The conversation was stilted, full of the usual financial jargon, but it served its purpose. After a few minutes, the CFO gestured towards the main circle. "Marcus, you remember Ethan Hayes from Blackwood Capital, don't you, Marcus?" Thorne turned his piercing gaze on Ethan. For a moment, Ethan felt like a schoolboy presenting a book report. "Hayes. Right. You're handling the financing for the Prentice acquisition, aren't you?" "That's right, Mr. Thorne," Ethan said, his heart pounding. This was it. It's going smoothly. But I was actually hoping to speak with you about your new logistics expansion. I have some innovative ideas about structuring the capital raise that could save you a significant percentage on interest. Thorne raised a skeptical eyebrow. He'd heard 1,000 pitches just like this one. "Is that so? My people are already in talks with the big players, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, and they're great." Ethan cut in trying to sound confident, not desperate. "But they're behemoths. Blackwood offers a more boutique, agile approach. We're hungry, Mr. Thorne. We'll work harder for you than anyone else." Thorne was about to respond when a sudden, powerful thrumming sound filled the air, drowning out the string quartet. The sound grew louder, a rhythmic whump, whump, whump that vibrated through the floorboards. Heads turned towards the sprawling back lawn, visible through a set of towering French doors. A helicopter, not the small news choppers one might see over the city, but a sleek black Sikorsky S-76. A machine favored by royalty and the ultra-wealthy was descending onto the private helipad. This was an arrival of a different magnitude. The gala's attendees, people accustomed to event displays of wealth, stopped their conversations and stared. This was not normal. Marcus Thorne himself looked intrigued, a flicker of surprise crossing his stoic face. "Well," now he murmured, his conversation with Ethan completely forgotten. "It seems our guest of honor has arrived." Ethan frowned. "Guest of honor, gobbled honor." He had studied the guest list. He knew every major player who was supposed to be here. Who could possibly command this kind of entrance, upstaging even the host himself? The helicopter's blades slowed and the door slid open. A figure was silhouetted against the internal lights. For a moment, they just stood there, letting the anticipation build. Then a woman stepped out. Even from a distance, across the lawn and through the glass, her presence was electric. She wore a gown of deep sapphire silk that seemed to drink the light cascading around her in elegant folds. Diamonds glittered at her throat, a necklace so brilliant it looked like a captured constellation. Her hair, which Ethan couldn't quite make out, was styled in a sophisticated updo that accentuated a long, graceful neck. She moved with a liquid confidence, an innate elegance that couldn't be bought or taught. It was the kind of poise that came from a lifetime of knowing your place in the world. A murmur swept through the room. "Who is that? I've never seen her before. Look at that necklace. That has to be Harry Winston." Tiffany had returned to Ethan's side, her jaw practically on the floor. "Oh my God, who is that? She looks like royalty." Ethan was just as captivated and slightly annoyed. This mysterious arrival had stolen his thunder, completely derailing his pitch to Thorne. As the woman drew closer, walking along the stone path towards the French doors, her features began to come into focus under the party lights. Ethan felt a strange, unsettling flicker of familiarity. There was something in the way she held her head, a certain curve of her cheek. But it was impossible. The woman approaching was a vision of power and glamour, a goddess descending from the heavens. Marcus Thorne broke away from the group and strode towards the entrance, a broad, genuine smile on his face, a smile Ethan had never seen him give anyone. He met the woman at the door, taking both of her hands in his. "You made it," Thorne's voice boomed, projecting into the now silent ballroom. "Everyone, may I have your attention?" The room fell completely quiet. Every eye was fixed on the entrance. Ethan stood on his tiptoes, craning his neck to get a better look. The woman was now fully illuminated by the chandeliers. Her face was heart-stoppingly beautiful, with high cheekbones, intelligent eyes, and a serene smile that held a hint of steel. Her dark chestnut hair was woven with subtle diamond pins, and as she turned her head slightly to survey the room, Ethan's world stopped turning. His blood ran cold. His champagne glass slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the marble floor. It wasn't possible. It was a phantom, a trick of the light, a cruel joke played by his own mind. But it was no joke. The woman standing beside Marcus Thorne, the woman who had arrived in a private helicopter wearing millions of dollars in jewels, the woman who had captivated the most powerful people in the country with her mere presence, was Amelia. His plain, boring, sensible ex-wife, Amelia. Thorne's voice echoed in the cavernous silence. "I'd like you all to give a warm welcome to the woman who is not only my dear friend, but the brilliant strategic mind and vice chair of the board behind the largest logistics empire on the planet. Please welcome Amelia Vance of Vance Global Logistics." The name hung in the air, an explosion, followed by a deafening silence. Amelia Vance. Vance Global Logistics. Ethan felt the floor drop out from under him. It was as if he'd been plunged into ice water, the air sucked from his lungs. His mind struggled to connect the two realities. The Amelia he knew, the one who wore faded jeans, who found joy in the smell of old paper, who thought a luxury was buying organic vegetables, and this regal creature commanding the attention of the entire room. Vance, her maiden name. He'd barely given it a thought. It was just a name as plain and unremarkable as he'd thought she was. Now it echoed in his mind like a cannon blast. Vance Global Logistics, VGL. They weren't just a company, they were an institution. A private, family-owned behemoth that dominated global shipping supply chain management and advanced AI-driven logistics. They were the invisible backbone of modern commerce, with a valuation that was whispered about in the financial world, but never publicly confirmed, rumored to be in the hundreds of billions. They were notoriously private, run by the reclusive patriarch Sterling Vance. And Amelia, his Amelia, was his daughter, the heiress. A wave of nausea washed over him. The memories flooded back now, tainted with a horrifying new context. Her simple life wasn't a choice born of a lack of imagination. It was an escape. Her love for vintage maps wasn't just a quirky hobby. It was a connection to her family's global empire. Her quiet, unassuming nature wasn't a weakness. It was a disguise. He remembered an argument they'd had a year before the divorce. He'd been furious about losing a promotion. "You just don't get it, Amy," he'd yelled. "You don't know what it's like to have to fight for every scrap to build something from nothing. You're content in your little bubble." He could see her face now, the profound sadness in her eyes. "You're right, Ethan," she had whispered. "I don't." He had mistaken her sadness for pity. It was guilt. "Ethan, Ethan." "What's wrong?" Tiffany's voice was a sharp, annoying buzz in his ear. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Do you know her?" He couldn't speak. He could only stare as Amelia. "No." Miss Vance laughed at something. Marcus Thorne said, her voice a low, confident melody that was utterly foreign to him. The woman he had criticized for being too shy to speak up at dinner parties was now effortlessly charming one of the most powerful men in the world. The dowdy ponytail was gone, replaced by an intricate chignon that revealed the elegant column of her neck. The sensible sweaters were replaced by a custom-made Jason Wu gown. The only thing that remained the same were her eyes, but now instead of quiet contemplation, they held a sharp, assessing intelligence. A cool, unshakable power. The crowd, recovering from its initial shock, began to buzz. Phones were being held up, no longer discreetly. The whispers were a rising tide. "Sterling Vance's daughter. I thought she was a recluse. I heard she was living off the grid, completely renounced the family. My God, VGL is the silent partner in Thorne's new Asian expansion. This is the deal maker." The last comment hit Ethan like a physical blow. The logistics deal, the deal he was trying to finance. Thorne wasn't just in talks with VGL, they were the entire game, and Amelia was the face of it. His meticulously constructed world, his entire sense of self-worth built on his ascent, shattered into a million pieces. He hadn't been climbing a ladder. He'd been a jester obliviously performing in the courtyard of a castle, completely unaware that his quiet wife owned the entire kingdom. He hadn't discarded a pebble. He had thrown away the Hope Diamond. Tiffany, sensing a seismic shift in the social landscape, was piecing it together. Her eyes darted from Amelia's radiant figure to Ethan's ashen face. "Ethan, how do you know her?" she demanded, her voice losing its breathy affectation and gaining a hard, suspicious edge. Before he could answer, Amelia's gaze swept across the room. It was a deliberate, methodical scan, the look of a general surveying a battlefield. For a fleeting moment, her eyes met Ethan's. There was no shock in her expression, no anger, no surprise, just a flicker of something cold and distant, a brief, almost imperceptible acknowledgement, like one might give a piece of furniture they once owned. And then she looked right through him, her attention moving on as if he were nothing more than a part of the wallpaper. That single dismissive glance was more devastating than any screaming match or tearful confrontation could ever have been. It told him everything he needed to know. She knew he was here. She had known all along. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a reckoning. The atmosphere in the room had changed irrevocably. Amelia Vance was no longer just a beautiful guest. She was the new center of gravity. A gravitational pull of power and wealth emanated from her, and every person in the room was a satellite being drawn into her orbit. The circle around Marcus Thorne reformed, but now Amelia was its sun. Seas, who had barely given Ethan the time of day, were now jockeying for position, trying to catch her eye, hoping for a sliver of her attention. Ethan stood frozen, a ghost, at the feast. People who had been greeting him warmly just minutes before now seemed to look past him, their gazes fixed on the new powerhouse. He had become invisible. Tiffany finally snapped. "Ethan Hayes, you tell me right now how you know the heiress to Vance Global." Her voice was a low, furious hiss. Her perfectly manicured nails were digging into his arm. She's my ex-wife." He mumbled the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. Tiffany's face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, and finally, pure, unadulterated rage. Her eyes, wide and incredulous, flickered back to Amelia, who was now engaged in an animated conversation with Senator Kensington. Her plain Amy. "Your boring little librarian ex-wife from Oregon is Amelia Vance." The name dripped with venomous awe. "The woman you told me had zero ambition and was probably living in a yurt somewhere I didn't know." Ethan pleaded, his voice hollow. "She never said a word. She called herself Amelia Vance, but I never made the connection. Who would she? She drove a 10-year-old Subaru. She bought her clothes at the Gap." "Oh, you idiot!" Tiffany snarled, yanking her arm away as if he were contaminated. "You absolute clueless fool. You were married to a billionaire heiress and you didn't know. You divorced her for me." The implication was clear. In her transactional world, he had just made the worst trade in history. He had traded a winning lottery ticket for a bag of magic beans. Desperate to do something, anything, Ethan started to move toward Amelia's circle. He didn't know what he would say. Apologize. Demand an explanation. He just needed to close the impossible distance that had opened up between them. He took 2 steps forward before a tall, impeccably dressed man with an earpiece subtly shifted his position, blocking his path. The man's suit was tailored to perfection, but it couldn't hide the solid build of a professional bodyguard. "Excuse me, sir," the man said, his voice polite but unyielding. "Miss Vance is in a private conversation." Ethan looked from the bodyguard to Amelia. She hadn't even glanced in their direction, but the message was clear. She had a wall around her, and he was firmly on the outside. He stumbled back, retreating to the edge of the room near a service corridor. Tiffany followed him, her face a mask of cold fury. "This is a disaster. My followers are already texting me. People are looking at me. They're laughing at me. The woman who stole a man from a billionaire. I look like a joke. Tiff, please," he begged. "We can fix this." "Fix this?" How she scoffed. "You're a mid-level banker whose entire claim to fame was dating me. She is the key to the biggest deal on Wall Street this year. You're not even in the same stratosphere. You're not even in the same galaxy." From across the room, Ethan watched Amelia. She was a different person, or rather the person she had always been, but had kept hidden from him. He saw it now in the small things, the way she gestured with her hands when making a point. He'd always found it slightly distracting, but here in this context, it was commanding. The way her brow would furrow slightly. When she was listening intently, he had thought it was a sign of confusion, but now he saw it was deep, analytical concentration. She had played a role for 6 years. She had built a fortress of normalcy around herself, and he had been the unwitting guard at the gate, too stupid to ever peek inside. The question that screamed in his mind was why? Why would she hide everything? Why would she subject herself to a normal, middle-class life with him? The answer, when it came, was even more damning. She had done it to see if someone could love her. Just her. Amelia, the woman who loved rainy days and the smell of soil. Not Amelia Vance, the heiress. He had been given the ultimate test, and he had failed in the most spectacular way imaginable. Suddenly, the crowd around Amelia parted slightly. She said a few parting words to the senator, and then began to walk, not towards him, but towards the grand terrace overlooking the gardens. Her path would take her directly past where he and Tiffany were standing. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was his chance. He had to say something. As she approached her security detail, the same man who had blocked him fell into step a few paces behind her. She moved with an unhurried grace, her silk gown whispering against the marble floor. She was just feet away. Amy Ethan choked out the name, sounding foreign and foolish on his lips. Amelia stopped. She turned her head slowly, her expression unreadable. For the first time that night, she looked directly at him. Her eyes, those same eyes that had once looked at him with such adoration, were now as cold and clear as ice. It's Mercy Vance, actually, she said, her voice calm and level. Yet it cut him to the bone. She glanced dismissively at Tiffany, a flicker of something that might have been pity, and then her gaze returned to Ethan. You're a long way from home, Ethan. I hope you're enjoying the party. Then, without another word, she turned and continued toward the terrace, leaving him standing in her wake, utterly and completely destroyed. The brief, chilling exchange left Ethan reeling. It wasn't just a dismissal, it was a demonstration of power. She had reduced their entire 6-year history to a polite, meaningless pleasantry one might offer a stranger. He was no longer a person to her. He was an anecdote, a footnote in a chapter of her life she had decisively closed. Tiffany let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Ms. Vance, oh, that is perfect. She didn't even raise her voice. She just erased you with a sentence. She looked at Ethan with utter contempt. I need a drink, a real one. She turned and stalked towards the bar, leaving him alone with the shrapnel of his ruined ambitions. Ethan's mind, trained to analyze markets and find patterns, was now racing, trying to process the new data. This couldn't be a simple coincidence. Her timing was too perfect. Her presence at this specific gala, tied to the very deal he was banking his career on, felt like a meticulously planned strategic move. The Amelia he thought he knew might have been quiet, but she was also brilliant. She had a master's degree in economics from Stanford, which he'd dismissed as a quaint academic pursuit. How had he been so blind? He needed to understand the scope of the damage. He pulled out his phone, his hands trembling slightly, and began a frantic search. Amelia Vance, Vance Global Logistics, Sterling Vance, daughter. The search results were sparse, a testament to the family's obsession with privacy. But there were whispers on obscure financial blogs and society pages from years ago. Mentions of a brilliant daughter who had eschewed the family business to live a normal life. An article from Forbes speculated that Sterling Vance's mysterious heir apparent was being groomed behind the scenes, a secret weapon being held in reserve. Then he found it. A small press release from 6 months ago, buried on the VGL corporate website. It announced the appointment of Amelia Vance to the board of directors and her promotion to vice chair of strategic expansion. The date was 3 weeks after their divorce was finalized. The timeline clicked into place with sickening clarity. Her finding herself in Oregon hadn't been a retreat. It had been a staging ground. The moment she was legally and logistically free of him, she had stepped back into her world, not hesitantly, but with purpose. She hadn't just been waiting, she had been planning. He looked back across the room and saw Marcus Thorne joining Amelia on the terrace. They were leaning against the balustrade, looking out over the manicured gardens, deep in conversation. Thorne was listening intently, nodding, his entire demeanor one of respect and collaboration. He wasn't talking to the daughter of a powerful man. He was talking to a peer. A horrifying thought began to crystallize in Ethan's mind. What if this wasn't just about personal revenge? What if it was business? He thought back to his pitch to Thorne. He'd been so proud of the innovative financing structure he'd developed for Blackwood Capital. It involved a series of bridge loans funneled through smaller, more agile subsidiary lenders to secure the initial capital for Thorne's expansion before the major bond offering. It was complex, aggressive, and hinged on the cooperation of several smaller entities. With a growing sense of dread, he started cross-referencing the subsidiary lenders in his proposal with known VGL, shell corporations, and investment arms. He had to dig deep into financial databases he had access to through his work phone, his fingers flying across the screen. And then he saw it. The linchpin of his entire plan, a mid-sized private equity firm called North Star Holdings. which had given him a preliminary letter of intent, was a wholly owned subsidiary of Vance Global Logistics. He felt the blood drain from his face. He had, in his ignorance, built his entire career-making proposal on a foundation that Amelia owned. She would have seen it. Her legal and financial teams would have vetted every aspect of the Thorne expansion, including all potential financing offers. She would have seen his name, Ethan Hayes, Blackwood Capital, and the entire, desperate architecture of his ambition laid bare. She hadn't just shown up tonight to humiliate him socially. She was here to destroy him professionally. He imagined the scene in the VGL boardroom. His proposal arrives. An analyst points it out. Sss. Vance, this offer from Blackwood Capital. The lead banker is an Ethan Hayes. Is that? And he could picture her cool, calm expression. Yes, I know him. Let his proposal proceed. I want to see how far he gets. She had given him the rope. She had watched him fashion it into a noose, drape it over a branch, and slip it around his own neck. Her appearance tonight wasn't the beginning of his downfall. It was the finale. She was here to watch him kick. The scale of her intellect, her patience, her ruthlessness was terrifying. He hadn't just underestimated her. He had failed to even comprehend her. He had been playing checkers while she was playing multi-dimensional chess, and he had been a pawn in her game from the very beginning. He looked over at the terrace again. Amelia gestured towards the sky, and Thorne laughed a deep, hearty sound. They weren't just closing a deal. They were celebrating a victory. Her victory. He finally understood. He hadn't broken her heart. He had insulted her intelligence. And for a woman like Amelia Vance, that was a far more grievous offense, one that required not just retribution, but annihilation. Armed with the devastating knowledge of his own engineered demise, Ethan felt a desperate primal need for confrontation. He couldn't let it end like this, with a cold glance and a silent corporate execution. He needed to hear it from her. He needed her to look him in the eye and acknowledge what she had done. He watched the terrace, waiting. After several more minutes, Marcus Thorne clasped Amelia's hand, gave a respectful nod, and headed back into the party, his face glowing with the satisfaction of a secured deal. For a moment, Amelia remained alone, her back to the ballroom, as she gazed into the night. This was his only chance. Ignoring the warning glance from her security guard, who was standing discreetly near the doors, Ethan pushed his way onto the terrace. The cool night air was a shock after the stuffy ballroom. "Amy," he said, his voice raw. She didn't turn around immediately. She took a slow, deliberate sip from her glass of water. "I believe we've already established the correct form of address, Ethan." Why, he demanded, his voice cracking. 6 years? Was it all a lie? A game? Were you just studying a lesser species in its natural habitat? At this, she finally turned to face him. The moonlight caught the diamonds at her throat, scattering cold fire. Her expression was not angry, but weary, as if she were dealing with a tiresome child. "I was not a lie," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying an immense weight. "I was the most honest version of myself I could possibly be. I stripped away the money, the name, the power, everything that people see before they see me. I wanted to know if that person, the one who loves books and quiet nights and can't cook to save her life, was enough for someone. I wanted to be loved for something I was not, something I had." Her gaze hardened. "I gave you the truest part of myself, and you told me in 1,000 different ways that she was not enough. She was too plain, too boring, not ambitious enough. You didn't just leave me, Ethan. You rejected the very core of who I am." The truth of her words was a physical blow. I didn't know," he stammered. It was the weakest defense, and he knew it. "No, you didn't," she agreed, a flicker of genuine sadness in her eyes. "But it shouldn't have mattered. The person I was with, you was a good person, a loyal partner, a loving wife. But you weren't looking for a partner. You were looking for an accessory. Something shiny to wear on your arm to impress people like Marcus Thorne." She gestured back at the party. You wanted the prize without understanding what the prize actually was. His desperation turned to anger, a last-ditch defense of his shattered ego. So this is what revenge. You show up here flaunting all this to ruin me. North Star Holdings. That was you, wasn't it? You let my deal go forward, just so you could kill it yourself. Amelia gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. You give yourself too much credit. My world does not revolve around you, Ethan. The Thorne Industries partnership has been in the works for over a year. Your little financing pitch was a minor, almost comical footnote. When your proposal crossed my desk, I had a choice. I could have had my team kill it quietly, professionally, but I decided to let it stand. Why, he whispered. Because I wanted you to be here tonight, she said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. I wanted you to get your foot in the door of this world you worship. I wanted you to feel the thrill of thinking you were about to make it. I wanted you to be standing right here at the peak of your deluded ambition, when you finally learned that the entire mountain you were trying to climb was owned by the woman you threw away because she wasn't good enough for you. She took a step closer, and for the first time he saw not just power, but a deep, abiding pain that she had expertly concealed. This isn't revenge, Ethan. This is a consequence. It's a lesson. Some things, loyalty, love, integrity, they don't have a price tag. And when you trade them away for something you think is more valuable, you end up with nothing. From the doorway of the terrace, a figure emerged. It was Tiffany, her face streaked with tears of rage, her perfect makeup ruined. Are you finished? She spat at Ethan. She ignored Amelia completely, as if acknowledging her would be to concede utter defeat. I'm leaving. I have a car coming. Don't call me. Don't text me. My social media manager will be blocking you on all platforms within the hour. We are done. She looked at him one last time, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and disgust. You were married to her and you let her go. You are the biggest fool I have ever met. Tiffany turned on her heel and disappeared back into the party, a tornado of fury and shame. Ethan stood there, stripped of everything. His career was over. The woman he'd left his wife for had abandoned him. He was a laughingstock in the only world he had ever valued. Amelia watched him, her face a mask of stoicism. The personal part of their interaction was over. This was now just business. For what it's worth, she said, her voice devoid of all emotion, Blackwood Capital will receive a formal notice tomorrow morning that their proposal is no longer under consideration. I'd advise you to have your resignation letter ready. Her security guard, Julian Croft, reappeared at her side, holding a light wrap for her shoulders. Ms. Vance, the car is ready whenever you are. Thank you, Julian, she said, turning her back on Ethan for the final time. I'm ready now. He watched her walk away, her posture perfect, her steps unwavering. She didn't look back. She was walking back to her life, a life of unimaginable power and influence, leaving him alone in the darkness on a billionaire's terrace, a relic of a past she had finally and completely shed. The gala for Ethan did not end. It merely mutated into a new form of torture. He was trapped in a soundproof box of his own, making, forced to watch a world that no longer included him. The vibrant symphony of power and influence he had so desperately wanted to join now played a funeral dirge for his life. Laughter from across the room felt like a personal accusation. The clinking of champagne glasses sounded like nails being hammered into his coffin. He saw his boss, Mr. Albright, senior partner at Blackwood Capital, speaking with a rival from J.P. Morgan. Albright glanced in his direction, a look of such profound disappointment and fury on his face that Ethan felt a physical chill. The message was clear. Don't you dare come near me. He was a contamination, a walking reputational hazard. People didn't just avoid him, they angled their bodies away as he passed, creating a visible void around him. He retreated to a dark corner, nursing a glass of club soda, the burning in his stomach too intense for alcohol. He watched as the party began to wind down, as the titans of industry departed in their helicopters and town cars their goodbyes to Marcus Thorne, echoing with the promise of future deals he would now only read about. The wait for the valet to retrieve his car was an eternity. He saw drivers for minor executives being waved through, while he was repeatedly told his car was on its way. It was the final petty humiliation in an evening of grand-scale obliteration. When his Audi finally pulled up, the young valet refused to make eye contact, a clear sign that the story had already trickled down to the staff. The drive back to Manhattan was a journey through a ghost town of his own hopes. The glittering skyline, once a symbol of his ascent, now looked like a jagged mocking grin. Each lit window in every skyscraper was a life, a career, a world he was now locked out of. He had flown too close to the sun, and the sun, it turned out, had been his wife. He walked into the penthouse he shared with Tiffany, and the silence was absolute. It wasn't empty, it was cleansed. The air no longer held her expensive perfume. The countertop was cleared of her dozen skincare products. He walked into the massive closet and saw the gaping holes where her collection of designer bags and shoes had been. She had been ruthlessly efficient. On the cold marble island in the kitchen sat a single object, the platinum keycard to the building, and a hastily scribbled note on a piece of Tiffany's personalized stationery. "Don't make this messy. My lawyer will be in touch about the rest of my things." There was no anger in the handwriting, just the cold, crisp finality of a business transaction. He wandered into the bedroom. There, lying in the center of the perfectly made king-size bed, was the Hervé Léger dress she had worn that night. It was a final, theatrical gesture of contempt, a relic of the life he had chosen and lost. He sank onto the edge of the bed, the expensive fabric cool beneath his hand. His mind, unbidden, flashed back to a different home. The small two-bedroom apartment he and Amelia had shared in Queens. It was always filled with the scent of old books and whatever she was growing in her window box, basil mostly. He remembered a Saturday afternoon rain lashing against the windows. He was stressed about work, pacing the living room. Amelia had quietly gotten up, put on a kettle for tea, and returned with 2 steaming mugs and a worn-out blanket. She didn't offer solutions or platitudes. She just sat with him, her presence a warm, calming anchor in his self-made storm. He had brushed off her quiet affection as insufficient, a passive response to his dynamic ambition. He saw it now for what it was unwavering support, a deep and unconditional love he had been too blind and too arrogant to value. He had traded that profound sense of peace for the brittle, high-pitched thrill of Tiffany's world, and the silence in this penthouse was his reward. He finally broke his body, racked with dry, silent sobs of a man who has realized he is the sole architect of his own ruin. Miles away, the journey back from the gala was the antithesis of Ethan's. Amelia sat in the plush leather interior of her custom Maybach as it glided silently through the Connecticut countryside towards a private airfield. Julian Croft sat opposite her, reviewing messages on a secure tablet. "The board has been alerted to the successful finalization of the Thorne partnership," he said, his voice a calm baritone. "Your father sends his congratulations." He said, and I quote, "It's about time someone put Thorne in his place." Amelia allowed a small, tired smile. Father enjoys the sport of it all. She looked out the window, the passing headlights illuminating her thoughtful expression. She wasn't euphoric. There was no giddy sense of victory. Instead, she felt a profound sense of closure, like the final satisfying click of a lock on a door she never intended to open again. "Was it difficult?" Julian asked, his tone shifting from professional to personal. He had known her since she was a girl, had been the one to help her orchestrate her escape into a normal life years ago. He was more than security. He was her confidant. Seeing him, she mused. No. Seeing what he had become, what he always was underneath. That was difficult. It confirmed the choice I made in leaving was the right one. The only one. She paused, her gaze distant. The woman he was married to, the plain Amy he despised, she died a little every time he chose ambition over her. Last night wasn't about killing his career, it was about attending its funeral. It was necessary to ensure that part of my past was well and truly buried. Her residence wasn't a sterile glass penthouse, but the top 2 floors of a historic brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, meticulously restored. The space was a reflection of her true self walls, lined with books from floor to ceiling, comfortable, elegant furniture, and pieces of art that she had collected for their beauty, not their brand name. It was a home, not a showroom. She changed out of her gown and into a simple cashmere robe, her movements fluid and unhurried. She walked over to a bookshelf and pulled out a small, leather-bound photo album. She flipped through a few pages past photos of her travels and family until she found the one she was looking for. It was of her and Ethan, taken about a year into their marriage. They were hiking somewhere upstate. She was laughing her hair a mess, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. He was looking at her, a genuine smile on his face, a smile from before the corrosive need for more had completely consumed him. She looked at the photo for a long moment, a silent eulogy for the man he might have been, for the simple happiness she had genuinely hoped they could build together. Then with a quiet sigh, she closed the album and slid it back into its place on the shelf. She would not forget that part of her life, but it would no longer define her. It was history, and she was an architect of the future. The next morning, as Ethan was receiving the phone call that formally ended his career, Amelia was standing before the VGL Board of Directors. The room was a testament to understated power, its single window, a vast panoramic view of the global shipping lanes her family commanded. The men and women at the table were the old guard, brilliant but cautious. The integration with Thorne Industries represents a significant capital outlay, said one older board member, a longtime friend of her father's. Your projected efficiency gains are aggressive, Amelia. Amelia didn't flinch. She gestured to the smart screen behind her, which lit up with complex data streams and logistical models. They're not aggressive, Robert. They're necessary, she stated, her voice resonating with calm authority. By leveraging our proprietary AI, Odyssey, to reroute Thorne's supply chain through our automated ports in Singapore and Rotterdam, we will cut their distribution costs by 19% in the first year alone. That's not a projection. It's a guarantee based on the beta modeling we've been running for 6 months. She fielded their questions with a precision and depth of knowledge that left no room for doubt. She spoke their language of risk mitigation, capital allocation, and market dominance, but with a visionary fluency that was entirely her own. She was not her father's daughter playing a role. She was the future of the company, and everyone in the room knew it. As the meeting concluded, with a unanimous vote of approval, she stood before the great window, looking out, not at the ships, but at the horizon. Her work tonight and this morning hadn't been about Ethan. He was merely the last piece of debris she needed to clear away before starting her real work. Her grand experiment had taught her a valuable lesson. Hiding from her power was a betrayal of her own potential. Now she was ready to wield it, not for revenge, not for status, but to build something lasting, to create a legacy that was not just inherited, but earned. The quiet life was over. The real work had just begun. And that's the incredible story of how one man's shallow ambition led to his ultimate downfall, and how the woman he cast aside stepped into the power she had been hiding all along. It's a powerful reminder that true worth isn't about flashy appearances or social status. It's about integrity, character, and the quiet strength that lies within. What did you think of Amelia's masterfully planned revelation? Was it cold-hearted revenge or justified karma? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of consequence and empowerment, please show your support by smashing that like button and sharing this video with someone who needs to hear it. And for more gripping stories that dive deep into the complexities of human nature, Make sure you hit subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.